Hello. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the use of single dimensional arrays in Java. An array is a data structure that contains elements. Each element will have an index through which you can randomly access that element. Now, array itself is an object, so you will understand the objects in another video. But however, note that array is just a reference variable to a collection of values. Now, let us understand this using an example. We'll call this as using arrays. I'll create a program. While array elements data type is important for creating an array itself, now you can have an array of any data type that you want. For example, you already have an array of strings called args that is always available in the main method. However, if you want to create an array, there are different ways to create that. Now, different notations can be utilized. For example, I can create an array of int to refer to say 5 numbers in this fashion. I can say int nums as a square bracket. Now, note that this notation here is a bracket or is an array notation just to indicate that this nums is not an int variable, but it is supposed to be a reference to an array. Now, most common way of doing this is by adding a bracket initially to this. So associate the bracket with the data type, not with the variable. Now that's a good practice. Now what is wrong with this? For example, if you create 2-3 variables, let's say for example, if I create a comma b comma c, now all the three of them are array references in this scenario. However, if you had given a of and then b comma c, now this is applicable only for A, or if you have done something like a square bracket is associated with C indicating these three are arrays, and that is wrong because A and B are int variables, C is an array. So to avoid that confusion, we always associate the array brackets with respect to a data type. So let's give nums. Now once you have created an array reference, you do not have anything. If you try to print something like what is nums equals to nums, you will get an error. Now you see that the error is because we have not initialized this nums. Now to initialize this, you can do it in one of many ways. Now number one method is do an initialization directly using a curly bracket. So I can give some 12, some numbers like this, and some other numbers. Now this time you can see that it is not giving any error. Now this is the initial values in that array. So the automatically nums will contain 4 elements and exactly 4 elements. You will not be able to increase it or decrease it. You can also find out what is the total number of elements in this. So I can say here now nums contain plus nums dot length integers or numbers. Now if you execute this code, since this is an object, some string version of this object will be printed, which may not be very friendly for us. So when I execute this, you will see that it's going to give you some output that says nums equals to a square bracket, a capital I, at the rate, a hexadecimal value. Now this is generally like to indicate it is an array of integers, and this is the kind of address, internal address is basically, but don't depend on that, it's called as a hash code. So it is really not useful for us to see what the values are there in this one. Now in order to print those elements, there are a couple of ways that you can do, couple of things that you can do. Number one, there is a class called arrays, and you can use a toString version of that. So this is how you do. You type here arrays dot toString of nums. Now arrays is from a package called util. Now more on that in another video you will learn. But if you want to convert an array into a string format, you can use this utility class called arrays and its function called toString. Now if I execute this, you should be able to see that the array contains 4 numbers, and also it says that it contains 4 integers. Now you can also initialize this in another way. For example, instead of saying equals to a curly bracket and the values, you can say new int of 5. Now in this case, we did not specify the initial values, but we simply said this array is a collection of 5 int variables. So when I execute this, you can see we get a zeros, 5 of them in the bracket. So that, and it contains 5 numbers. Now once you have initialized in this fashion, you can initialize the individual elements using its index. For example, nums of 0 is equals to 12 and nums of probably 3 equals to 44. Now this is the 0th element, first element, or rather element with index 1, element index with 2, and element with index 3. So you will see that it's going to be 12 0 0 44 0. When I execute that, that's what happens. So that's how you will be randomly able to access that elements too. Now another way of initialization can be done at later point in time. However, if you do like nums equals to in curly brackets some numbers, this is an error. Now the reason why this is an error is because this notation of assignment is only possible during declaration. However, you can also say I would like to have this being initialized by using new int and then a square bracket. Now we say that we want to create an object containing these values, and this is perfectly all right with Java. So we get that output, no problems. So we have seen different ways of creating an array. Now if you have another array, for example int array, and let's say something called tmp equals to nums. Now this is also not a problem because tmp now is just like nums, just another reference to this particular object. So there is one object and two references. So using tmp, if you access any value, for example if I say tmp of 2 now is equals to 999. Now you can see you are accessing the second, or rather the third element with index 2, and you are changing that to 999. Now what is that 999? What is it going to change? Now note that temp was never allocated an extra memory. It is still referencing to the same memory as this. So when you try to print nums back, it's the now modified version of the original array because we modified using temp of 2. So when I execute this, you can see the value has been changed from 505 to 999. So that is how arrays work, and especially single dimensional arrays. Now that we know how to work with these arrays, how do I access this? How do I access all the elements? Now all the elements can be accessed using a for loop. So I can just use a for loop in this fashion. Note that Eclipse provides a very simple feature for us to work with arrays. So I can say for and a control space. When I do control space, you can see that it is having an option says that iterate over an array, and it has already taken nums.length. It has figured that in this particular scope, the array called nums is the closest one than args. But of course, if you want to iterate that through args also, you can do that. How do we do? You simply say control space enter. Now it says for I equals to 0. Now instead of I, if you want to declare a variable like I, you can see that it is changed. Now if you press tab, it will give me the list of all the arrays that exist in the scope, which is nums and args. So I can choose from nums or args and then press enter. Now in this case, it is okay for me. I would like to keep nums itself. And then I would like to print each of the elements by saying nums of I. And then that's how you can just print that. So I'll say here array content, something like that, and then I execute this. Of course, I don't need that arrays importing. So when I execute this, you can see that it says array contents, and I'm getting all the values from this array.